Welcome back to Channel Water. Today we're going to talk about time. What is time? Does time even exist? Understanding time from the point of view of water and not from the point of view of human beings, which is the way we are used to looking at time. Also, I will share with you a few breakthroughs that we made on the subject of time and understanding time, and that comes specifically from looking at it from the point of view of water and from the microscopical point of view. First, we have to look at the equation of life that we're born into, what we know. And we live in a universe where there is consciousness, there is matter, and there's space. So there's somebody, consciousness, that's doing something with matter in a space, in a place. And we could talk about the bigger picture in a different video about how all of it could be just consciousness, matter, space, and how all of that is a manifestation of consciousness. But first we have to talk about our equation and the way we see life from our point of view. So we are conscious beings that live in a space, and in that space there's matter that we manipulate and do things with. So we are the scientists, we are the conscious beings, we do experiments, we map nature around us into the different elements, we conduct a lot of different experiments, and we measure those. So we're the ones that map life. We map it in many different ways. So we created a lot of different ways to map the world around us. One of the things that we created are calendars, clocks, timers, and we use those to map movement in space. So we measure the amount of time it takes for something to happen. And then we also create clocks and calendars that reflect certain cycles within the nature around us. So we have seasons, day, night, years, but we put into place all of those names, basically, to the different cycles that are happening around us. So when we look around us in the universe, we see that time, the way that we know it, the measurement of time, calendars, clocks, timers, only exist where consciousness exists and where conscious beings are measuring certain things. And then when we look at it, we see that time is basically a measurement of change. So it's a change of a placement of an object, it's a change in movement in space. Time reflects an actual change, with whether it's of matter or of consciousness doing a certain process within matter or itself. So it really is a tool we invented to use. And we use it in many different ways. One could be to make sure that we meet at the same time at a certain place. The other one is to measure the time it takes for a process to happen. And all of those things only exist where we are. If we look at the moon or Mars, there is basically no time there, and there's no change. There's no movement to measure. If there's water there, most likely liquid water, then there will be change, and there will be something to measure. But in that sense too, we look at water as consciousness, as an active agent, as a mover. And that makes sense. So where there's water, there's consciousness, there's change, there's movement, there is something to measure. Then there's time. So for the most part, space, places that have no liquid water, are timeless. There's no movement, there's no time in them. Philosophically, we understand that connection between movement and consciousness. There's two options when something is moving. One is that a conscious being chose to move, so I'm moving from point A to B for a reason. Or a conscious being put it into motion, into movement. So a satellite, self-driving car, even though those objects are not conscious or consciously doing anything, they were put into movement by a conscious being for a purpose. So that's why I draw that connection between movement to consciousness and then the time it takes for that movement to happen. We can see how they're all connected together. For that reason, here on planet Earth, there's so much for us to measure. There's so many movements happening, and we can see how water basically shapes this planet, this Earth. So it's the atmosphere, the seasons, rain, rivers, the ocean, and then the structures that water has built, plants, animal, people. Highways are rivers that we build. So we can see how water shapes the Earth, how water is the moving agent on this planet, and it's the source of that movement of time and change on this planet. We can see then that time is connected to consciousness through movement, but then also, what is the deeper connection between time and consciousness? And here we're specifically talking about water, not just from the human point of view. So if we go back to the equation of life, where we talked about consciousness, matter, space, now we see that, let's say, consciousness, water, uses energy to manipulate that matter within space. So now we find an even deeper connection between time and consciousness, water, and that connection is through the energy. Water has a range of ability and activity within space, and that comes from the limitations of the physical world. But what we see is that water goes from ice, liquid water, to vapor. These are the main 3 points, and there's infinite points between them, but these are the main 3 that we can identify. And we can see that when water is ice, it's basically frozen in time. It lacks movement, connection, ability to move things, create, build. And that's why I say that planets in space, even though they have ice, water, they're frozen in time. They have no ability of movement or creating change. Then we have liquid water, which is the ideal state for water. When it's liquid, it's fully connected, it's able to move, build, create, and that's when we see architecture of life being built. And then we have vapor, and that's when water has too much energy, and the particles are too energized and they separate from each other, and now it doesn't have that connection anymore. It doesn't have the ability to build together as a whole. And we can see that in nature, there's always movement towards keeping water as liquid and also warm. So within the architecture of nature, plants, animal, people, we find that construction, that architecture of putting liquid water into homes and then also protecting them from those elements of getting too cold or too hot and staying in that ideal zone of temperature. So for water, temperature and time are actually connected. Time is flexible and very local. It's not just a constant clock that is moving forward at the same pace. Time is actually flexible, and it depends on the amount of energy, of the heat you have at a certain place. So different bodies of water can experience time in a very different way. And the movement, the measurement of that movement, is just a measurement of the energy, of the heat signature from that body. So movement for water is dependent on the amount of energy it has. And like I said, nature built our bodies to be in a constant, ideal temperature for water. So you can see how our bodies are designed to always keep the same temperature inside. It doesn't matter how hot or cold it is outside, our bodies will work really hard to make sure we maintain the same temperature inside. If it gets too hot or too cold, we die. Our bodies break down and they cannot perform. So that's an important part of this equation of why, as human beings, we have an illusion of a constant time, of this constant ticking clock that is always the same. Our bodies are clocks. They are designed to do just that, to be this machine, this clock that is moving at the same pace We grow, we get older, and we're always moving forward at the same pace, at the same time, because we have the same temperature. So as human beings, we live in a layer of time that is always the same. It is the same temperature. So our bodies give us this illusion that time is a constant, that it's always moving forward and at the same pace. We don't feel the flexibility of time, we don't understand it, because for us, we never stop growing, we never stop aging. Time is always moving forward. And because of that, we don't see how there are actually many different timelines on this planet, depend on the temperature you're in. So plants, for example, they live on a completely different time zone. They don't have the heating mechanisms that we have in our bodies, so they move in a much slower pace. Their growth, their movement, everything is much slower. But if you put time-lapse on a plant, on a vine climbing on a wall, it looks exactly like a lizard that's just climbing up the wall. But because it happens much slower in a different time zone, we don't see it. It's almost invisible to our eyes because that movement is so slow, and we don't sit long enough to just look at a plant grow. We almost feel like it happens without us noticing it. A simple way to explain the connection between time and temperature is in our everyday life. So we have, for example, we have time machines in our homes. Most of them are in our kitchen. So let's say you had lunch and you didn't finish your food and you want to keep your food for later. So you don't want to eat it now, but you don't want it to spoil. You want to slow down the process within your food, which is the process of the water breaking down the food. So you will put it in the fridge. You're going to cool down your food to slow down the process. Let's say you want to eat it much later, you don't know even when. You're going to put it in the freezer. So we're going to freeze down time, just stop it altogether until we're ready to continue that process. And on the other end of the spectrum, let's say you have a vegetable and you want to get to the essence of the vegetable, but you don't want to wait for it to ferment and go through all that process. So we're going to heat it up and cook it. So you can see that when it comes to the microscopical level of life, we can and we do move faster or slow down the process of life around us, the biological process of life. And the fact that the only time machines you actually ever have are of cooling and heating, because that's where time is, and that's how we can move time faster or slower. And that also brings us to the point of time travel. Unfortunately, we cannot time travel. We are already time travelers as we move forward within space, within time. And the only question is how fast we move. So the range goes to almost zero when things are frozen, into a really fast pace until we can't take that heat anymore and our bodies break down. So one day, if we choose to, we could move probably faster if we find ways to deal with the temperatures, the heat, and how it affects our bodies. And in the same way, we could slow down our time if we manage to deal with how cold our bodies get. Because as you know, when water freezes, it breaks down the cells and the structures in our body. So if we are able to deal with the extreme temperatures, we will be able to slow down or fast forward as far as time goes, move faster forward, but I don't think we will ever be able to travel back in time. And I think that's part of the main reason for this video, is to understand that time on its own does not exist. Time, as we think of it, as this timeline that is connected to space, and you can move backwards or forward on it, that does not exist. There is only a present moment that we're in, and then as we move forward to the next present moment, to the next present moment, we can measure movements and change in space. But once that change occurred, that's where it is. There is no time to move back to a place where that matter or that change did not happen. So the idea of time-space has flaws in it, in thinking that it's something that you can travel within time too. You can only travel within space, and we conscious beings measure that movement. So nothing really exists but the present. And that's actually good news, because most of our problems in life are dwelling on the past or worrying about the future, which none of them exist. The only movement we have is being in the present as we take it forward another step and another step. So being human beings, having these bodies, and our bodies are clocks, and that's the reason we experience time as a constant, as something that is moving forward no matter what you do. We have this feeling that time exists outside of our being, that it's something that is part of space, it's part of the movement forward. But the reality is that your body is a clock, and that's the reason you experience time. In our bodies, there's constant movement in a constant temperature. And that's what creates this perfect clock that is always moving forward at the same pace. So understanding that you are the clock, and that is the reason you know and experience time. But it's only in this body. As the biological process in your body happens and it's moving forward constantly, you're growing, aging, and then when we leave this body is when we go back outside of this clock to being just consciousness in a timeless space. Consciousness itself is timeless. Its experience, it's always of the present. It's only in this physical body and in this physical world, as we move and change, that we have the experience of time. We have that measurement of time. But our true being is timeless. It doesn't grow old, it doesn't age, it doesn't have any of those concepts that we have when we're in these bodies, when we are this ticking clock, moving forward, growing and aging. You can see your body like a city that is, let's say, a city that's young, that just got started, and it's beautiful, and it's building and growing, and then over the years, there's a lot of wear and tear, and things start to break down and get older, and your body is that. It's this home, it's this building, architecture, that is constantly being used, constantly moving, and within that movement, you age, and you feel time moving forward. And of course, if movement stops in your body, we know that this architecture breaks down, and the water in our body just goes back to that endless cycle of water, which is our ocean, atmosphere, clouds. Water itself doesn't age, doesn't change, it's timeless. We don't know how old water is. That's just a fact, even in science. We only know to carbon date certain elements in nature, but water doesn't have carbon in it, and we don't have any way to measure it. It is timeless. For that reason, water is the perfect symbol for our soul and for the cycle of our soul, the cycle of our timeless, constantly present being. In today's video, I wanted to create that first connection between time and consciousness, consciousness and water, water and energy, temperature, and for us to see that time and temperature are actually one measurement. It's one thing, and that time is flexible and local to the different bodies of water. So time can change, can move. It's always moving forward. The question of how fast or how slow, how hot or how cold. And for us, for human beings, it's hard to see that because we experience time in a very specific and uniform way. All human beings, our bodies work very hard to keep the same temperature, the ideal temperature for water, which is part of the design of this architecture, to understand that our body is the clock. We are clocks. That's why we experience time. Outside of the clock, time does not exist. For a rock that's floating in space, or for water itself, time doesn't exist. There's only measurement of energy, temperature, which affects process, movement, change, and that's what we measure. That is the measurement of time. So I hope it makes sense, and you can start to see what the present moment is, and the fact that time itself, whether it's past or future, doesn't exist at all. Most of our being is the present moment, the present experience, and we are the ones that will bring time to space. Most of space around us is frozen in time, is timeless. And as we move out to different planets, we will bring time with us. We are the active living agent of life, and we will bring that movement, that change, the architecture, we will bring that out to space. So we are the time travelers, we create time, we bring it into the timeless space. Speaking of time, I just wanted to give you also an update about Channel Water. I'm currently working on a few videos at once, and it takes a bit longer to put them out as the subjects get more detailed and more complex. I'm also working on a big project for over a year now. It's kind of a secret project, but it's for me the most important project that I'm working on. And once it's ready, I will start launching it out pieces by pieces. So please stay tuned. I'm always working on this channel on new content for it. And thank you very much for watching today. We'll see you soon.